The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 201. Jim Brandstatter and Dan Deerdorf are the new broadcast team for Michigan football. No news yet from Mitch McGary, and it's time for another football recruiting update. That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to this week's show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Compared to the first two recruiting classes of the Brady Hoke era, the class of 2015 is off to a slow start. Not to worry though, Coach Hoke and his staff are working hard to bring in a class that, while small in numbers, should be very high in quality. On today's show, we get our April recruiting update from Tim Sullivan, recruiting editor at the Wolverine magazine and thewolverine.com. Before we bring Tim on, let's check Wolverine news and notes for this week. Last week, we learned that two familiar names would be bringing us all of the play-by-play action this fall on the Michigan Football Network. Longtime color analyst Jim Brandstatter will be handling play-by-play this fall, while Michigan great and Hall of Famer Dan Deerdorf will join him as the radio color analyst. On next week's show, Jim will be my guest, and we'll talk about his move to play-by-play and what it means to work with his former teammate and close friend, Dan Deerdorf. So make sure you join us for that next week. We still don't know if Mitch McGary will test the NBA waters or return for his junior season. We will know soon though. Next Sunday, April 27th, is the deadline to declare for this year's draft. It's a huge decision that not only impacts Mitch and his future, but also impacts the immediate recruiting strategy for Coach John Beilein. We'll know by this weekend again which way Mitch McGary is going. Coach Hoke says sophomore Shane Morris has closed the gap a bit on Devin Gardner at quarterback. He said if the season started today, Devin would probably be the starter. The bottom line, though, it's good to have the competition and the depth this year at quarterback heading into summer workouts. It looks like incoming freshman sensation Jabril Peppers will see his first action at nickelback, but could end up playing corner or safety this season. Coach Hoke and Coach Madison have been busy thinking about how best to utilize Peppers and his special talents. Where Jabril fits remains to be seen. Brady said we'll see how he comes in and how he does. Last week, Brady said he regretted not fixing the chemistry issues that surfaced with Team 134. He said he should have taken more of a leadership role in getting that whole situation straightened out. He vows he's going to be more assertive this year and said he believes this year's team has better chemistry along with some very solid senior leadership. We won't know for sure until the rubber meets the road this coming season, because that's when leadership and chemistry gets put to the real test. Coming up next on our Michigan Game Day segment, it's time for an April recruiting update, and can we ever get enough recruiting talk? Joining us will be the recruiting editor of the Wolverine magazine and Wolverine.com, Tim Sullivan, here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Joining us on Michigan Game Day this week is recruiting editor Tim Sullivan of the Wolverine as we take a look at or get an update on the recruiting class of 2015 and maybe even take a look beyond that. Tim, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as we all know, football season comes to an end, then there's spring practice, but with the recruiting season and cycle never ending, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like it gets more and more year-round as the years go by, and a lot of it nowadays is happening during what are the traditional off-seasons of summer and in the winter time, so it actually is kind of good to have a year-round aspect of the football program to follow.
This time of year, heading, with spring, now we're in April, and then into the summer, what are the quiet periods, or how much contact can staffs have with players?
A new contact period just opened April 15th, and it goes through the end of May, actually. So the staff, it's actually an evaluation period. They can get out on the road and see kids in their schools. In states where they have spring practice, they'll go watch kids practice with their teams. And in other states, including Michigan, they'll just get out there and see individual workouts with some of the players. And so they're actually able to see some live football this time of the year. And since their spring game a couple of weeks ago, there's nobody else who can see that in the state of Michigan. But they're definitely getting some of that in.
And what about during the summer? Is there a quiet period there?
During the summer, yeah, it's a quiet period. So only on-campus evaluations are allowed. There are some exceptions. There's a camp that's been held in Southfield the last couple of years. It'll actually be down in Harper Woods this year. Is the Sound Mind, Sound Body camp, and there's an NCAA rule that allows that to be considered an on-campus camp, so the staff can see kids there. But for the most part, over the summer, it's phone calls only or on-campus visits only. And the staff is obviously year-round evaluating film and figuring out which of these kids they do want to make contact with.
Well, Tim, let's start with our class of the 5 hard commits, if there is such a thing these days that we do know about. And let's start with Sean Crawford. He's a kid from St. Edward's High School in Lakewood, Ohio. The cornerback seems a bit on the smaller side. I guess you never know with these listings. 5'9", 170. What do you know about this kid?
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of a cornerback that can hit really hard. Antoine Winfield, who used to play for Ohio State. He's a little guy, but he hits like a ton of bricks. He plays much larger than he is, and that's something that really helps when you're as little as he is, because 5'9" might even be a little bit of an exaggeration of his height. But he has natural athleticism, and when he has that mentality to come up and hit a kid, that will really help him kind of alleviate any concerns about being too small, quote unquote, to play the position.
And we've got another cornerback committed. He's a bit bigger. Garrett Taylor. He's out of St. Christopher's in Richmond, Virginia, listed at 6'5", 188. I've seen some tape on him. Looks like a pretty nice player.
Yeah, he's a kid that some people think might end up playing safety because he does have that naturally thick build. He can put on some weight. But he has the athleticism and the flexibility to turn and run with receivers at cornerback, and that's where I think he's going to stay. He has those long arms that can help you play against the 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" wide receivers of today. And his natural athleticism combined with that size allow him to be kind of a lockdown man coverage guy. He's kind of in line with what we think the Michigan staff really wants to do going forward, which is play much more physical on the edges. Obviously, the Seattle Seahawks won a Super Bowl playing that way. Michigan State made it to and won a Rose Bowl playing that way. I think we'll see Michigan make that transition, and Taylor's exactly the sort of guy that they will want on the edge to allow them to do that.
Well, these 5 commits, the third one is also back there in the secondary, and Tyree Kennell, not sure how you pronounce that. He's out of Wayne High School in Dayton, Ohio. He's a good-sized kid, 6 foot, 190 pounds.
Yeah, Tyree Kennell is a kid that he'll play safety at Michigan. He could play cornerback, but he's played safety pretty much for his whole high school career, and I think he'll probably stay there when he gets up to Michigan. He does have that kind of thick build that you like to see out of a safety, and he's accustomed to the position because he's been playing it his whole life. He's not the sort of guy that's going to be flashy and go out there and make plays. He's more of a solid coverage guy. Solid, he just does his responsibility instead of going out there and doing the flashy things. But that's what you need when you have cornerbacks who are going to maybe play a little bit more risky in bump coverage, playing out on the island a little bit. You need a safety who can adequately come up and fill those gaps that they're potentially creating.
The next hard commit is a legacy. We're all familiar with this name, John Runyon Jr. John Preps at St. Joseph's in Philadelphia, 6'4", 250 pounds.
Yeah, he's a player that camped at Michigan last summer and earned an offer at Michigan summer camp. People say, he just got the offer because his name is John Runyon. And actually, this Michigan staff has shown that it's actually tougher than you'd expect as a legacy player to get an offer. So they clearly saw something that they liked out of Runyon. We've seen kids like Berkeley Edwards, whose father Stan and older brother Braylon played at Michigan, unable to earn a Michigan offer just because of the name, and he ended up at Minnesota, where it looks like he's going to have a nice career. But when the staff does offer a legacy kid, it's clearly because they like what they see and not just because of the name. Runyon's a little undersized at this point. You mentioned he's only 250 pounds. I think he's added some weight this offseason. Not sure exactly what he's playing at now, but he's an interior prospect because of that height, that 6'4" height. He doesn't have extremely long arms to make up for only being 6'4" to play the offensive tackle positions, but he has the mentality that I think people got used to out of his dad, that kind of over toughness to a certain extent, and that's something that the Michigan coaches really like. And I think once he adds the weight to become a true guard player, he'll be exactly what they're looking for, especially with the move to more of an inside zone. He has the mobility too, and that's really what's going to help him become successful at Michigan.
Tim, is he one of these under-the-radar kids, though? Because when you look at the various recruiting services, you see 2 and 3 stars around his name, or is it just because he committed that early?
He's not a kid that has done a lot of camps, and that's a lot of times where kids will get the reputations built up where they become 4 and 5 star kids. I think Runyon being a bit of a project because he's only 250 pounds, that's not what he's going to play at as an offensive lineman in college. There's too much variability in terms of how he can develop that has kind of seen the recruiting sites say, you know what, we're going to take a step back and take it easy on this kid. We'll have plenty of opportunities to see him this coming summer and then as a senior, and if he earns it, he can move up in the rankings. I think people know about him, especially since he's committed to Michigan, but it's going to take some time for him to prove it on the field, where he didn't get as much exposure last year, even though St. Joseph ended up winning their sectional title, I believe it is, or maybe even a state title. The setup in Pennsylvania is too weird for me to even understand it, but now that he's on the radar and people know a lot about him, I think he'll really get evaluated, and if he is deserving of moving up, this is his opportunity.
Well, the last of these early, not early commits, but hard commits is Andrew David, who's a kicker from Washington High School, Massillon, Ohio, and a great football city, as we all know. He's a kid, though, that, you know, again, you look at the star ratings for him, he's maybe on average a 2-star. Not a big kid either, 5'9", 165. What do you know about him?
He's a kicker, so the 2-star ranking is nothing to be scared of. It's been a long time since there's been a kicker ranked 4 stars on Rivals at least, so it's just a matter of the position he plays. It doesn't have enough of an impact on the field on a regular basis to earn those higher rankings. David is a pretty consistent kicker. He struggled a little bit as a junior this fall, but I think some of that was kind of the pressure of everybody knows he's a Michigan commit now, and now it's just about returning to getting back to his fundamentals, and that's something that he's been working on this offseason. He's also a very good baseball player. He's a middle infielder, and I think he is hoping to potentially play baseball at Michigan as well, but obviously his football future will be at kicker, and I think he's one that could either kick or punt, or possibly do both depending on what Michigan needs. And he has a strong leg. It's just a matter of honing that consistency out of it, continuing to get even better, especially when he's not kicking off a tee, which he won't be able to in college.
The one position that everyone, we all know, keeps an eye on is quarterback. And, of course, now with Coach Doug Nussmeier on board, we've heard talk of some very, very highly regarded quarterbacks. Where are we, and what names should we be keeping an eye on, Tim?
Yeah, Michigan has only offered 4 quarterbacks, and at this point, all 4 of them are off the table. Josh Rosen committed to UCLA. David Sills committed to USC, both of those guys out of California. Texas Tech for Jarrett Stidham, and Notre Dame for Blake Barnett out of Texas and California, respectively. So it's not quite back to square one because the coaching staff has been evaluating guys all along, but they're certainly, when it comes to making that next offer, they're in the evaluation stages of seeing who in that next tier they really would like to offer. A local kid, Alex Malzone, out of Bloomfield Hills, Brother Rice is one that they're definitely looking at. Several in California, Kyle Kearns out of Pleasanton, Brady White out of Newhall, and Travis Waller out of Anaheim are all getting looks. And there are some on the East Coast, too. Brandon Wimbush out of St. Peter's Prep in New Jersey is a big one. But really, this coaching staff is taking the time to see all these kids throw during that evaluation period that we talked about earlier. And whichever one that they like the most, I think that's where they'll go with the offer. And they'll go down the list until they find a guy who thinks that Michigan is the place for him.
Well, of all those names, our local kid from Brother Rice, Alex Malzone, I have to admit, I mean, I try to keep up on the high school scene and the recruiting, but that's a name that sort of popped up recently that I hadn't heard much about. He's a pro-style quarterback, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did not start for Brother Rice as a sophomore. He split time with a quarterback, Shane Lacanaria, who ended up in D3 football. But Malzone is transitioning from a full-time baseball player to primarily a football player who still plays baseball, and that's something that's kind of kept colleges a little slower in the evaluation process because he's a kid that hasn't been a year-round football player, which is the norm for quarterbacks nowadays. So he's a kid that's getting some evaluations, and I think he would be a good fit for Michigan. Now they're still going to look and see if there are better fits out there, and there might be but he's definitely one that grew up a Michigan fan. His dad has season tickets to Michigan and will definitely get looks from the Wolverines.
Who are some of the other big names and high-priority guys that Michigan has still a legitimate chance at in this class?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is Damian Harris, the running back out of Berea, Kentucky, a former Michigan commit. He's a 5-star. He's the number 4 player in the country. This kid is the real deal. He decommitted from Michigan because his best relationship with the Michigan coaching staff was with offensive coordinator Al Borges. When Borges was fired, Harris took a few days and said, you know what, I'm going to reopen things, take another look at the recruiting process, and consider all my options. Those options now include Alabama, Ohio State, Kentucky, among several others. So this kid's a big-timer, and he's going to have pretty much any offer that he wants when it comes down to it. But he did grow up a Michigan fan. Obviously, that Michigan connection has been there, and the Wolverines will really want to convince him that he would like to return to the maize and blue fold. I think another kid to look at who actually ended up visiting over the weekend is Chris Clark, a tight end out of Old Farm School in Avon, Connecticut. 6'6", 245-pounder. He's one of the best tight ends in the country, probably the best offer list of all the tight ends in the country. And a kid that I think Michigan will have a great shot at now that he's visited. He really liked it. Was committed to North Carolina, but it looks like Michigan and Ohio State and probably Notre Dame will be there until the end, and he's another kid that Michigan fans should get really excited about.
Well, we know Damian Harris is the real deal. Everyone is big on him. Another running back that seems to be very interested in Michigan, though, is Michael Weber from Cass Tech. What kind of a runner is he?
Yeah, Weber is kind of a zone-style runner. He's a one-cut-and-go kind of guy. During his junior year, he managed to show much more power because his offensive line wasn't as amazing as it had been when he was a sophomore. Last year, he was running behind David Dawson, who ended up at Michigan, obviously, Dennis Finley, who went to Michigan State, Kenton Gibbs, who went to NC State. This year, it was more guys who were a year younger than him, maybe some guys stepping in for the first time. And Weber responded very well. He showed that he can run over a couple guys when the holes aren't there. He has always had great speed. He's kind of a track guy who has built up to become a football player. He's probably about 5'10" and maybe 215 pounds at this point, so he has the mass to be that type of player. He's not going to juke you out of your shoes like Harris is able to do, which is probably the thing that Harris does best that Weber can't yet do, because otherwise they're pretty similar backs, great speed, good power, and the ability to find holes and run through them.
Has Michigan offered him, or is he just interested at this point?
Yeah, Michigan offered Weber. Michigan was one of the first schools to offer him, and he was one of the first players in the 2015 class that they offered. They offered him back last February, so about 14 months ago. And he's a kid that was very high in Michigan, grew up a big Michigan fan. His family is full of big Michigan fans. But when Harris was committed to Michigan, Weber was kind of a back burner prospect for the Wolverines. And since they lost Harris, Weber is back in the forefront of their minds. And I think he's really taking kindly to that because he likes Michigan a lot, and he just wants to be shown that love. And I think if Michigan really wants to continue pursuing him, I would expect him to end up at least strongly considering Michigan, if not ending up in Ann Arbor.
Our guest here on Michigan Game Day this week, as we update the 2015 recruiting process, is recruiting editor Tim Sullivan from the Wolverine. Tim, excluding attrition with this upcoming class, and that's always a tough thing to call, how many scholarships is Michigan going to give out this year?
The class is going to start very small. I think the number right now is about 13. They're obviously going to end up with more than that. As you mentioned, there's attrition every year. I think there's an average of 4 to 6 players each off season, so you'll see that class grow maybe about 17 to 19 guys, probably on the smaller end of that, because Brady Hoke and his staff have done one of the best jobs of retaining talent that I've seen in a long time. You saw obviously much more attrition year to year under the previous coaching staff than you do under the current coaching staff. So if it gets to maybe 16 to 18, that would probably be a good estimate at this point, and that would allow Michigan to fill all their needs and get probably a couple players that, not necessarily luxury players, but once they fill all their needs, shooting for the stars with the last couple spots.
We got used to, in the first couple of years with Coach Hoke, early commitments. It seemed like by spring, more than half of the class was filled. And right now, there are only 5 hard commits this year for the class of 2015. Is there any concern that we only have those 5 commits at this point in the season?
I would say there's a little bit of concern only because Michigan has already lost to not only Harris, but a fellow 5-star wide receiver, George Campbell, out of Tarpon Springs, Florida, a teammate of now Michigan freshman offensive lineman Mason Cole. So the fact that they've kind of gone backwards at times is a little worrisome. However, they're not as focused on wrapping guys up early as they had been in previous years. I think in 2012 and 2013 especially, and also quite a bit last year, but not quite as much, they wanted to fill the needs that they had, make sure that they had bodies in those positions. Now, offensive line was obviously the biggest need probably for those 2012 and 2013 classes, and they filled all their offensive line spots pretty much as quickly as any spot on the field. So once they got those, they were able to kind of focus on picking up the top-end talent. And this year, most of their needs are filled. The depth on the roster is pretty good, so they can aim for the stars a little bit more overall. They do have some needs still. Obviously, running back is one of them, but they have Harris and Weber highly interested, and those guys don't plan to make early decisions, so they can wait for those guys. Same sort of thing at wide receiver where they have some need, not a great need, but they have some highly talented prospects interested who are planning to wait, and they're willing to wait for those guys too. They're not going to try and pressure anybody into an early commitment just so that they can, have their name on that commitment list and make it look a little bit better in April. They're more concerned about what it looks like next February.
Well, Tim, history to most of these recruits is, of course, at their age, what happened last year or the year before with the program. Given that, is Brady losing some edge in these recruiting wars because of the lack of success on the field the last 2 years?
I would say that they're not necessarily losing steam, but there is something to be said for not having the rebuilding sales pitch to give to a kid. If a five-star kid is looking at a school that went 7-6 last year, it's one thing. If that school went 4-8 the previous year, you can say that they're building. Now, Michigan went 11-2 a couple of years ago, so it seems like there's a bit of a decline, and I think at this point some kids are going to want to see it on the field this fall before they really think about committing, and I think maybe Harris is one of those kids, and some of the other top kids that they're in on want to say, you know what, Michigan is on the table, but I'm going to be a little more patient to see if they're going to be the Michigan that my parents told me about or the Michigan that I've been a little worried about over the past maybe 7 or 8 years, other than that great year in 2011.
Is Michigan getting some interest from kids that they normally wouldn't because of the Nussmeier hire? And it might be early in the 2015 class to see a bump up from that, but maybe looking forward to 2016?
I think the 2015 class was a kid that they didn't get in Josh Rosen, the number one quarterback in the country, who ended up committing to UCLA. But I think if Michigan didn't hire Doug Nussmeier, Rosen wouldn't have been as interested in Michigan as he was, and I think Michigan did come in second to UCLA. So that's something that really helped them with the Nussmeier hire. I think hiring Nussmeier is going to be more of the same sort of thing that I just mentioned. People will want to see it on the field. Now, obviously, Nussmeier did coordinate two of the best Alabama offenses of the past couple decades over the last 2 years, but kids who have seen the Nussmeier hire like him on a personal basis. They want to see Michigan prove it on the field. They want to see an offensive line that can block, and they want to see wide receivers out there catching the ball, running backs running with it successfully before they really commit to anything in terms of what Nussmeier means for their interest in Michigan.
What about the class of 2016, Tim? I know it's we get ahead of ourselves in these recruiting wars. I guess we have to. You have to stay on top of it. But any names that have jumped out at you in that class that have Michigan interest?
Yeah, there are two kids in the state of Michigan that have been offered, and I think Michigan is in great shape with both of them. The first one is Theo Lacusa out of Traverse City West High School, a 6'5", 300-pound offensive lineman. He visited Michigan in February and told me coming into the visit that he was thinking he might commit on that trip. I think the Michigan coaching staff said, look, we're 2 years away from your signing day. You need to get out and see the world a little bit. We want to make sure that once you commit to Michigan, you're not going to suddenly say, oh, I wish I'd visited USC, or oh, I wish I'd visited Florida State. Once you see the things that you think you need to see in the process, come back to us, and then we'll accept your commitment. Then the other one is Dalen Hayes out of Orchard Lake St. Mary's, which is obviously a school that's been very kind to Michigan. A 6'3", 225-pound linebacker. Another kid that I think was very close to committing to Michigan. At this weekend's Rivals Camp Series, he was planning to make his commitment, and I think Michigan would have been that choice. However, he's kind of taken a step back as well. He wants to see a couple other schools. Wisconsin offered him last week, so he wants to see Wisconsin before he really thinks about completely ending his recruiting process. But I do think that when all is said and done, Michigan will still be in great shape with him. And then there are some national players. Isaac Nauta out of Buford, Georgia, is a great player. Had an uncle, Joel Smingy, who played for Greg Madison at Western Michigan back in the 80s, a kid that's going to be a 5-star tight end. Eric Swenson out of Downers Grove, Illinois, already committed to Michigan, an offensive lineman and a potential high 4-star, maybe 5-star kid. So I think the 2016 class is off to almost as strong a start as the 2015 class when you consider the kids who have very high interest in Michigan.
Well, there you go, Michigan fans. Everyone's, I think I get more email, Tim, about recruiting. It never ends. So there's our update for right now. And our guest today has been recruiting editor Tim Sullivan from the Wolverine. And, of course, on the show, I'm trying to do a monthly update on recruiting because it is such a hot button with fans. So I'm sure we'll get you back on soon, Tim. But one quick question for you. Spring football, of course, wrapped up. We've got, guys taking a little bit of time off and then conditioning, 7-on-7 drills in the summer. What are your early thoughts right now on the upcoming season? Does your gut tell you this is going to be a bounce-back year?
I think it will be a bounce-back year just because it seemed like 2013 was a year where almost everything that could have gone wrong did, except in that Northwestern game where Michigan did get those lucky breaks. There were so many games where they didn't. In the Nebraska game, for example, they were a couple plays away from winning. Even the Ohio State game, they were a couple plays away from winning. I think that this year, even if the good luck factor evens out and just gets to the complete national average, whatever that would mean, I think that Michigan would have a chance to bounce back. The thing is, they have such a tougher schedule with Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State on the road that even if the team improves quite a bit, the record will only improve incrementally unless they really, really step it up and maybe catch some of those good breaks.
Okay, recruiting fanatics, don't forget, if you want to keep up on everything that's going on, and again, it never ends, make sure you subscribe to the Wolverine magazine or thewolverine.com and follow Tim Sullivan and the excellent job that he does on the recruiting trail for the Wolverine. So, Tim, I'm sure we'll have you on this summer. Thanks again for your time.
Yep, thanks for having me on, Mike.
On our fan feedback segment this week, Matt from Paris, Michigan called our listener line with his very short and very succinct thoughts on what has to change for Michigan football this season.
Oh, this is Matt Graham, Paris, Michigan. Going back to about the success of the 2014 Michigan team, the offensive line has to improve. The offensive line doesn't block. It doesn't matter who the quarterback, running back, or wide receivers are. Thanks again to Matt from Paris, Michigan for calling our listener line this week. You too can give us a call with any of your Maize and Blue thoughts or opinions. My listener line is open 24/7 to call and record your thoughts at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Just tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and then give us your 2 cents worth. You can also email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. So come on, Wolverine fans. I would love to hear from more of you. And who knows, just like Matt, you might hear yourself on an upcoming show. Coming up next, we wrap the show up for another week with Wolverine Quick Hits here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. On Wolverine Quick Hits this week, following an intentional walk to sophomore Sierra Romero in the 5th inning, senior cleanup hitter Caitlin Blanchard drilled a 3-run double into center field, breaking a 1-1 tie in the number 3 ranked University of Michigan softball team's 7-2 victory over number 12 ranked Minnesota on Sunday at the Wilpon Complex. Blanchard's double put Michigan up 4-1, providing the first 3-run lead of the series. Runs were hard to come by in the first 2 games of the series due to some outstanding pitching performances from both teams. 1-0 Minnesota win on Friday, 3-1 Michigan win on Saturday. With her double, Blanchard is now 8-for-11 with 15 runs batted in following an intentional walk to Romero. 3 batters after Blanchard, junior Lauren Sweet provided the exclamation point to the inning with a 3-run homer to center field. In all, Michigan sent 9 batters to the plate in the 5th and scored 6 runs to take a 7-1 lead. Freshman pitcher Megan Betza showed flashes of dominance, striking out 11 Golden Gophers, including a stretch of 5 in a row between the 4th and 5th innings. The righty no-hit Minnesota threw 4.2 innings before Sam Mackern hit a homer in the 5th. In fact, the only other hit off Betsa was a second solo shot by Erica Meyer in the 6th. So the Wolverines, again ranked number 3, heading into this week's play, have an overall record of 36-7, 14-1, sole possession of first place in the Big Ten. The University of Michigan baseball team exploded for 13 runs and 17 hits, taking a 6-0 lead after 3 innings and cruising to a 13-3 win at Purdue on Sunday at Alexander Field in West Lafayette. The Wolverines took 2 of 3 games from the Boilermakers in this Big Ten series. There were plenty of offensive stars on the day. Sophomore Travis Mazes went 3 for 4 with 4 runs scored, 2 doubles, and 2 ribbies. Sophomore Jacob Cronenworth also scored 4 runs to go with a triple and an RBI. Freshman Carmen Benedetti, Johnny Slater, and Jackson Lamb had 2 hits apiece, and senior Cole Martin and junior Jackson Glines each had 2 ribbies on the day. The Maize and Blue also received a quality start on the mound from fifth-year senior Logan McAnallen. McAnallen allowed just 5 hits and a run with 3 strikeouts and 4 walks in 7 innings to earn the win. The U of M defense also recorded 3 double plays on the day in the game's first 4 innings. Michigan back in action this week, sporting a record of 18-21-1, 8-7 in the Big Ten. The number 16 ranked University of Michigan women's tennis team wrapped up its 5th straight Big Ten championship and 4th undefeated conference season in program history with a 7-0 win at Purdue on Sunday afternoon at the Schwartz Tennis Center. Michigan grabbed the outright title for the 3rd time in the last 5 years and won 11 Big Ten contests for the first time in program history. Michigan will be the number 1 seed for the upcoming Big Ten tournament and receive a bye into quarterfinal action on this Friday. Michigan will face the winner of the number 8 versus number 9 matchup on Friday morning at 10 a.m. The tournament is being held in Evanston, Illinois, on the campus of Northwestern University. So Michigan ends the regular season, with an overall of 19-3 and a perfect 11-0 in this Big Ten championship season. Senior Joanna Sampson and Sachi Sugiyami represented the number 7 ranked University of Michigan women's gymnastics team on the final day of the season on Sunday in the individual event finals of the 2014 NCAA Championships held inside the Birmingham Jefferson Convention Complex in Birmingham, Alabama. Sampson ended her phenomenal 4-year career on 2 events, very nearly winning back-to-back national titles on floor exercise. In the final routine of her career, Sampson, the defending champion on the event, shined on all 3 tumbling passes, bookended with a powerful double layout on the first and a double pike on the third. She was the second to last gymnast to go in the order and was tied for the lead with Oklahoma's Maliana Kanua and Haley Shaman before Arkansas's Catherine Grabs scored 9.9 in the final spot to overtake all 3. Michigan wraps up the 2014 season with a 28-8 record, winning the Big Ten championship and an NCAA regional championship and qualifying to the NCAA championships, where it finished 10th for the 20th time in the last 22 seasons. So congratulations to Joanna Sampson, Sachi Sugiyama, and the ladies gymnastics team. For the latest Michigan news and chatter, visit www.gbmwolverine.com and become a member today. You'll get an email when a story is published and have access to our very active message board, where Wolverine fans share their thoughts and opinions on anything and everything Maize and Blue. So visit www.gbmwolverine.com today and sign up for membership. Make sure you're in the Wolverine loop this spring and summer. We also hope you'll take the Michigan Man podcast along with you this summer. At the beach, on the road, wherever you go, it's getting easier to take the show with you. Here are just a few places where you can listen or download the show. If you're listening on your laptop or desktop, you can get the show from iTunes or directly from our site at www.themichiganmanpodcast.com. When it comes to apps, you have many choices. iTunes, the Android store at Amazon.com, there's TuneIn Radio, Stitcher Radio On Demand, the Windows 8 App Store, and Spreaker Radio. Starting this week, you can even find the show on YouTube. So whatever device you have or wherever you go, it's getting easier to take the Michigan Man podcast with you. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at the Michigan Man Podcast and follow us on Twitter at the Michigan Man. Again, my listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. You can also email me at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. I really do enjoy hearing from all of you, so give us a shout anytime and share your maize and blue opinion or thoughts. Thanks again to this week's guest, Tim Sullivan. Tim is the recruiting editor at the Wolverine magazine and thewolverine.com. He does a bang-up job keeping all of us up to speed on Michigan recruiting news, and we cannot get enough of that, it seems. So thanks again, Tim, for joining us this week. Next week, my guest will be the new radio play-by-play voice of Michigan football, Jim Brandstatter. So I hope you'll make it a point to come back next week and hear my conversation with Jim. He's a great Michigan man, and it will be great hearing him bring us all of the action from the Big House, hopefully for many years to come, on the Michigan Football Network. That will do it for this week. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and please spread the word about the show and the many ways you can listen or download us. And make sure you're back here next week to join Jim Brandstatter and myself. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue.